What's up, Flannelverse? It is time for Monday Night Football, Week 16. We've got the Saints at the Packers in Lambeau. We just got the news, as was pointed out in chat. Marquez Valdes-Scantling is a surprise inactive. Did not see that one coming at all. I thought it was pretty, didn't hear anything all day about MVS being inactive. Maybe I just missed some news or something, but was not anticipating Marquez Valdes-Scantling being out for this one. So that'll be interesting to look at when we get to Saints receivers. We're going to have some value there among the Saints receivers. If you think that they're going to be able to throw the ball at all with Spencer Rattler at quarterback, somebody's going to catch the ball, I think. So probably one of these receivers is going to, catch a few passes, pop as value on this slate. I think it's a good one to leave a little bit of salary on the table because all of the Saints are so cheap. Outside of, Kendre Miller and Spencer Rattler, everybody pretty inexpensive on the Saints, and you have to play somebody on the Saints with the way DraftKings and FanDuel do it. You need at least one player from both teams. So kind of an interesting slate from that perspective where we're all going to want to play Packers, obviously, but you got to find somebody from the Saints. So we will get into who looks good on the Saints. We're going to be going position by position as usual, starting with quarterbacks, then running backs, receivers, tight ends, defenses, kickers. I will take a brief look at FanDuel. Most of what I say is going to apply to both sites, but I'll take a brief look at ownership and projections on FanDuel and prices, and then get back to making some lineups. And I'll get out of here with about 15 minutes left to make my own lineups. If you have not already subscribed, would appreciate trying to get to 5,000 subscribers by the end of the NFL season. We're over 4,000 now, but we have a long ways to go, more than 900 subscribers remaining before we reach that goal. I'll be doing these shows throughout the playoffs. I'll be doing Showdown slate breakdowns throughout the playoffs when that's basically all we have at that point. So if you have not already subscribed, would appreciate the support there. Okay, let's get into this. Let's start with the quarterbacks. Jordan Love is the top projected quarterback on the slate pretty clearly. Projected for 17.5% ownership at captain. At flex, Love projected for 51% ownership. So we're talking just a little south of 70% total ownership for Jordan Love. We don't have that many players on the slate that we can feel really good about. And I think Jordan Love is one of the few that, if you look at the projections, one of the few that actually projects pretty well on the slate. Josh Jacobs stands out above the rest, and then it's Jordan Love, and then it's Kendre Miller, who, I saw some chatter in chat already about fading Kendre Miller, and I get it, because are they going to be able to run the ball? Are they going to abandon the run when the Packers get up by 2 touchdowns? Who knows? But we really are hurting for pay up options on the slate. Not that many great pay up options on this slate. So I do think it is one where we can leave a little bit more salary on the table, maybe loosen up the rules. I usually suggest these are my 8 studs or whatever, and I want to have at least 3 in every lineup. Man, it's a gross slate for finding studs. Your pay up options are players that project really well. There's just not that many on the slate. So Jordan Love is one of the better options there. I'll be playing a lot of Jordan Love, probably around 70%. The big concern there is that they have been very, very run heavy already in recent weeks. Packers rank 31st in neutral pass rate, so second to bottom of the league in terms of how much they want to be throwing the ball, and they have no need to throw the ball here on the Saints. So that is the one risk with Jordan Love, is they might just not use him that much because they might just run it every time because they don't really need to use Jordan Love all that much. But still, I think he's a strong option. I think I'll probably have right around the field, right around 65-70% Jordan Love feels about right to me. I would always stack Jordan Love. He's not much of a runner. He's averaging 6.5 rushing yards per game this year with, I think, 1 rushing touchdown. So I would always stack Jordan Love. And if I have him in the captain spot, I want to have him double stacked because of the scoring dynamics on DraftKings, where the receiver outscores the quarterback on every passing play. So for Jordan Love to be the player that you need at captain, you need him to be spreading the ball around, because if he focuses too much on one receiver, that receiver is just going to outscore him. On Sandy Mass Neil, will you break down the Christmas slate tomorrow at midnight? I will not be doing it tomorrow at midnight. We'll be celebrating Christmas Eve with my wife's family tomorrow night, but I will be breaking down the Christmas slate with Scott Barrett at Fantasy Points tomorrow. I think I might do a second show on this channel. So I might do break down the main slate with Scott and then come on this channel and do Showdown stuff. I'm not sure if I'll have time, but make sure, if you're not already subscribed to the Fantasy Points YouTube channel, that is where you'll find the breakdown for the Christmas slate. I'm hoping to do another one on this channel as well. But we'll at least be doing that one over there. And of course, Scott, always love doing shows with Scott. He provides a lot of great insights also. So that'll be a good show. All right. So we've got Jordan Love, a clear pay up option. Look at how bad Spencer Rattler projects. I mean, 12.33 here on Roto Grinders, and that's better than Fantasy Points has Spencer Rattler projected for 10.8 fantasy points. He, in 3 starts this year, is averaging under 9 fantasy points per game. He has just not been very good. And he actually, even with, he had a couple games where he averaged, like, his first 2 starts, he averaged like 30 rushing yards in those 2 starts. And then he had 0 rushing attempts in his 3rd game. So not sure what the difference was there. But yeah, Spencer Rattler does not project all that well. Now he's missing yet another one of his weapons. Who is he going to be throwing the ball to? We're going to get into that when we get to wide receivers, because it just got messier with Marquez Valdez-Scantling. He was the one, like, he was the best option of the wide receivers, at least on the Saints. And now MVS is out, so we're man, he's throwing to a bunch of bench players. Rattler's a tough play, but he's also not getting a ton of ownership. So I will have, well, let's see what the ownership looks like. 37% projected ownership in the flex at captain. Spencer Rattler projected for 6.5% ownership. I think I'll be right around there. So again, somewhere in that 40 to 50% exposure for me to Spencer Rattler. I think just generally betting on quarterbacks on single game slates tends to be a good idea. And Sadie Mass, who are they missing that they didn't have last week? Well, I mean, I'm not talking about last week. They're missing Chris Olave. They're missing Rashid Shaheed. They're missing now Alvin Kamara is out. He was in last week. MVS is out. He was in last week. So they're missing several players, even that were there last week. But yeah, so Spencer Rattler, I'm going to have 40 to 50%. I think he's generally a strong bet. I also think he is the type of quarterback that I would not be shocked to see that ownership, like when the cards actually flip over at 30%. Maybe not, just because there are so few good options on the slate. But I suspect it's going to be a lot of people just playing a ton of Packers and not really wanting to play the Saints at all. And I get it. The spread is pretty wide here. Oh, he's not talking to me. Well, but yeah, they are missing some players. The Saints, I don't think we really need to think about the neutral pass rate because he has not started all of those games. But as I said, in 3 starts, Rattler averages just under 9 fantasy points. Packers defense has also allowed the 7th fewest schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to quarterbacks over the past 5 weeks. It's also in Lambeau, so you get, a team that generally plays in a dome going to Lambeau Field. The weather not that bad for considering that it is in Lambeau. It's fairly warm relative to what you can sometimes see in Lambeau, but not ideal conditions for a quarterback who's typically playing in a dome. Still, all things considered, he did, like I said, he had a couple games where he averaged like 27 and 31 or something rushing yards in his first 2 starts. So I think that is something that he can do at least a little bbit. Was not much of a runner in college. Again, his 3rd game didn't even attempt to run, so I'm not like counting on it, but I thought it was kind of promising that he ripped off some like 20-yard runs also. So all things considered, I do like Rattler quite a bit. I'm expecting him to come in lower owned than what he's being projected for, just because people don't really want to play Spencer Rattler. So I'll lean in and just hope that he can throw a couple touchdowns here and maybe run for 30 yards or something. I also, like I said, he typically doesn't run a ton. So same rules apply where I'm always stacking Rattler when I have him. If I have him in the captain spot, I want to have him double stacked. I think I feel more strongly about the first one I think he's more viable to play unstacked in the flex than he is to play without at least 2 pass catchers at captain, because I think if the Saints really do struggle and he does just rush for a touchdown and run for 30 yards and then 100 yards passing, whatever, he could just be the highest scoring player on the Saints without bringing anybody along. So you could loosen up those rules a little bit with Spencer Rattler. I'm still going to keep my rules the same, where I'm requiring a pass catcher and requiring 2 when I have him at captain. He also, like all of his pass catchers, are pretty inexpensive, much more inexpensive than he is. So yeah, generally I want to have him stacked and multi-stacked at captain. But I just wanted to mention, like, you could loosen it up a little bit just because it could be a really low scoring. I mean, for the Saints could just put up very few fantasy points, and if he happens to be the one who runs one in, and that's their only touchdown, like, he could theoretically, I think, be the highest scoring player on the Saints without bringing anybody along with him. All right. Moving on, I think quarterbacks are, I mean, I guess not that straightforward, but generally don't need to spend a ton of time on quarterbacks. Running backs gets really interesting for a few different reasons. One being Josh Jacobs is the highest projected player on the slate by quite a bit. Less so here. Rotogranite doesn't have it, I think, as big of a gap here. Jacobs projected for 21, Jordan Love for 18. So just a 3-point projection difference there. Fantasy Points has it as a nearly 6-point difference in terms of projection. Jacobs down to Jordan Love. Jacobs is like pretty clearly the best play on the slate, I'd say, and he'll be getting the ownership that reflects that 50.5% projected ownership in the flex for Jacobs. At captain, projected for 31% ownership. I think it was higher earlier in the day. It was closer to 40% Josh Jacobs. I think I'm just eating it. I think I'm going to have all the Josh Jacobs. I will say, for me, I'm probably eating it in part because I'm hedging a little bit, because I am fading Josh Jacobs big time in best ball. So hoping that he does not go off in the way that he's expected to. But I think the ownership is honestly warranted, even without any hedging considerations. I think 80% ownership for a guy who has just been, he has, over the past 5 weeks, he has the second most fantasy points out of any running back in the league. Like I said, they are 31st in terms of neutral pass rate, which means they're second in terms of neutral rush rate. They just want to be running the ball constantly, and they've had a lot of success running the ball, and they should continue to have success running the ball against the Saints. So everything looks great for Josh Jacobs. Probably if I were making just one lineup, I would eat the chalk and just play Josh Jacobs in the captain spot and find somebody else to play elsewhere. Maybe if you want to get different there, I recommend somebody like Christian Watson is sort of interesting. Jayden Reed, Romeo Doubs. I think all of those, like, Packers pass catchers in the captain spot can save a little salary. So that's sort of interesting too. But I think if I'm just making one lineup, it's probably Josh Jacobs in the captain spot. Everything looks great. I'm pulling up the Coach Peak Index Discord on Jacobs because I thought it was sort of interesting, the talk about managing his workload at some point. Let me see if I can find it. I mean, most of what I find on Josh Jacobs is just he's really good. Like, the coaches love him at this point. Where was this? Okay. I have a lot of confidence in Chris Brooks. That was one quote from Matt LaFleur on the 12th. Every rep. Okay. Why am I not finding this? Give me 1 second. First of all, some glowing stuff on Chris Brooks. I guess that's a couple weeks old. I can't say enough about. No, sorry. Okay, so on the 19th, head coach Matt LaFleur said of Josh Jacobs, "We have to be mindful of Josh Jacobs' workload. He does a great job communicating with us in terms of where he's at. He's been pretty healthy. He's an animal out there. I feel that there are very few times where he doesn't make the first guy miss. Hopefully, we'll continue to draw up some better things for him because he's handled a lot of tough yards where he's getting hit in the hole on a yard downfield, getting hit in the hole or a yard downfield." Okay. If we get to that point where our playoff position is locked, then reducing Jacobs' workload is a conversation. So they have not gotten to the point where their playoff position is locked at this point. I think they're like almost guaranteed to make the playoffs at this point, but the position is still kind of up in the air. So yeah, I think like they're not even thinking about managing his workload. But I will say, I think that is going to be the case, at least for the first half, where it's going to be Josh Jacobs just gets the rock every time they have the ball. Okay, yeah, Big One says I should refresh the ownership. That's a good call with MVS. Let me just refresh. Let's see if this works. Now I'm going to refresh the page. Right, do we have, because of all this Scantling out? Yes. Okay, good. So Jacobs now at 31% captain ownership, which I think is the same as it was at flex. I don't think Jacobs has changed at all, right? This all looks like it's the same projected ownership as it was before, I think. But yeah, Jacobs. So my expectation is they're going to come into the game where Josh Jacobs is going to get, most of the carries in the first half. He's going to have his usual workload. I do think that if the game gets out of hand and they're up by, 20 points in the third quarter, he is definitely a candidate to lose some opportunities to the backup running backs in this game, because it's going to be so tough. Like if they just see like Spencer Rattler's not moving the ball, the Saints can't move the ball on us, we're up 20 points, it's the third quarter. I would think that it's going to be they're going to move to the backs at that point. Not sure. Chris Ostro says, speaking of the wide receivers, Nick Underhill, that Saints beat reporter, just tweeted he likes Austin Jr., Kevin Austin, but no real confidence if that helps anyone. Great. So even the beat writers don't really know what to do with the Saints receivers. We'll try to figure that out once we get to the receivers. But so I love Josh Jacobs. He's going to be in a majority of my lineups. Certainly, I'll probably eat what the field has, like around 80% Josh Jacobs. I might even have higher in the captain spot. But again, for me, that's mostly hedging. So it's not necessarily what I would recommend to have over 30% in the captain spot. But because I think that there is a possibility that they do, like if they get up enough that they limit his workload in the second half, by then he's probably already scored 20 fantasy points, by the way. I do also like Chris Brooks and Emmanuel Wilson to some extent. Brooks coming in, he's 2,000, Emmanuel Wilson 2,400. I wouldn't play either of them at captain. Brooks projected for 13% ownership, Emmanuel Wilson 10% ownership. So once you look at those ownership numbers, I guess I would lean toward Wilson for the lower ownership. He's a little bit more expensive. I also still think that Emmanuel Wilson probably has the better contingent upside. I don't know if that's necessarily the case. I'm sort of guessing that that's the case because I think that Brooks has more of the like third down receiving back role, whereas Emmanuel Wilson would just take over once they get to the point where they're just like, all right, let's just run out the clock on the ground. I would think it would be Emmanuel Wilson. Over the past 5 weeks, Chris Brooks has 9 carries and 6 targets on 24% route participation. Emmanuel Wilson has 17 carries, 0 targets on 5.6% route participation. So Chris Brooks like has that kind of receiving back upside. I think that the bigger, like the tail outcome upside would be in favor of Emmanuel Wilson, who I would think would take over as the just like run it out running back in the case of a blowout. I'm not totally sure of that though. Maybe they both mix in at that point. Musgrave active. That's also a good point. Musgrave being active. I did not see that coming. I also am relying on Tucker Kraft scoring like 11 plus fantasy points to potentially advance another best ball team. So did not love seeing that Luke Musgrave is back for this one. But yeah, they're probably not going to be throwing the ball much anyway. So yeah, I like all of the Green Bay running backs. I think I'm going to be above weight to the field on both of the backup running backs. I'm going to be mixing and matching. I will have lineups that have 2 running backs from the Packers. I think if it might be smart to make a group. I don't even know if I would make a group that says at most 2. Because if you happen to get to, like, if it really is a blowout where Josh Jacobs scores 2 touchdowns in the first half and they're like, all right, let's go to the backups, then the other 2 are both cheap enough. It could theoretically get there. I don't know. I think you could make a group though that just says at most 2 running backs if you wanted to on the Packers, because there's probably going to be other players outscoring at least one of them. I think that's it as far as the Packers. Yep, those are the only 3 that have any kind of projection. Then we have the New Orleans side. Kendre Miller stepping in with Alvin Kamara out this week. He has been the pretty clear, next up for the Saints. Actually projects really well, but the price is up there. They priced him at 9,400. It is, sorry, I don't want to go there. Actually, let's take a look at Kendre Miller's ownership. So a captain, Kendre Miller getting only 5% of captain. That's actually kind of interesting. In the flex, Kendre Miller getting 29% ownership. So getting about 35% total ownership. I think that's fine. Like people were talking about fading him earlier. I would not be surprised if he comes in higher than that, just as like the one Saints player that anybody wants to play, that you can like kind of count on the role a little bit. I could see him getting more than the 35% ownership that he's being projected for. And I think he's sort of interesting. Like, I don't really know what to expect from his like passing game involvement. And actually, I pulled up his college stats. I was looking at it. He's not very involved in the passing game at all in college. 12 total receptions in 10 games in 2021, and then in 14 games in 2022, 16 receptions. So like just over one reception per game over the past couple of years, and actually under one reception per game for his college career. But I think that his workload with the Saints has been a little bit better. And I'll pull up the game log here for Kendre Miller. And they also they're used to playing with Alvin Kamara, so it wouldn't be surprising to me if they just kind of fall back into keeping up with their usual game plan. He has 5 targets in 4 games on the Saints, and that's like limited playing time because he's been playing behind Alvin Kamara. And in the last game, 30.6% route participation. So I don't really know much about him as far as if he's a good pass catcher, but I think he's probably going to still have that role where he will see a few targets at least, or at least I think that is like not unlikely. I don't know if it's necessarily what we should expect, but because they are a team that's been relying on throwing to the running back all year, I kind of think they'll stick to the game plan at least to some extent, and he'll see a little bit of usage in the passing game. So yeah, I think Kendre Miller seems like a fine play at I'll probably have 35%. That seems about right. We also don't know. I don't think that Alvin Kamara is some great talent at this point. And Alvin Kamara was awesome as a fantasy asset all year on PPR sites, I guess, and non PPR sites. Even on a bad Saints offense, even with him not being particularly efficient, Alvin Kamara is very good. So what if Kendre Miller is actually a better running back? That wouldn't be that surprising at this point for Kendre Miller to be the better running back. And if he gets anything close to the usage that Alvin Kamara has been getting, I think he's a pretty strong play at 30 to 35%. Sam says he thinks probably more like 40 to 45. There is a tipping point there where it's like, do I really want the $9,400 guy on the team that's just not going to be able to move the ball? And I'm not sure I would at that point. But I think if he does come in 30 to 35%, I think that's a reasonable number. That's probably around where I want to be on Kendre Miller. And then beyond Kendre Miller, we have Jordan Mims, Jamal Williams, revenge game. Jamal Williams. I mean, we know that Jamal Williams can run in Green Bay, right? So maybe if Kendre Miller's not getting it done, they just say, "Hey, Jamal, come in here. You've had success running at Lambeau Field before." I'm not sure how much we can really expect from Jamal Williams. How much has he come in at all in recent weeks? My expectation, to be clear, is that it's going to be mostly the Kendre show, but we don't know for sure. So last week, 4 snaps, 6 snaps the week before. They did have week 8. Jamal Williams played 20 snaps. I guess that must have been, there were a lot of snaps in that game because that was still only 29.4%. He has maxed out early in the year. Interesting, 11 and 8 carries. Since then, he's maxed out at 3 carries in any game. But again, they've had Alvin Kamara active all year. Wouldn't be that surprising to see Jamal Williams. He was never going to cut into Alvin Kamara. Alvin Kamara is just a big part of the Saints offense. It's maybe a little bit more likely if we see Kendre Miller struggle at all, that Jamal Williams has more of that 40% role. So I think he's a fine play. Getting 9% ownership. I mean, he's 3,600, so he actually needs to do something. I also don't think that he's very good at this point in his career. 9% is probably fair ownership on Jamal Williams. And then Jordan Mims kind of interesting because he's only 400 and getting 7% ownership. So I also think similarly, there's a little bit more of an opportunity now, obviously, with Alvin Kamara out. There's some chance that Jordan Mims is going to take on a bigger role. Matt says, I'm going to take the risk on Jordan Mims because he's been so heavily involved in the passing game during his snap. 0.3 targets per route run, 2.33 yards per route run. I think that makes some sense to go to, and he's only 400. if the Saints get down at all, and maybe they don't trust Kendre Miller in the passing game again, like 1 target per game in his college career, maybe it just becomes Jordan Mims who comes in. So I do think that he is a pretty strong play at just 400. I'm with you on that one. 7% ownership. I'll probably be, double the field, maybe triple the field on Jordan Mims. I'll take those shots. I think that does it for then Adam Prentice. I don't think we need to play here. All right, let's move on to wide receivers. So again, running backs, just generally, I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of running backs in this game. I think it's going to be kind of a ground and pound for as long as they can for both teams, I think. And then at some point, maybe the Saints are going to be forced to throw to try to keep up. But for the most part, I think it's going to be a lot of running in this game. As you can see here, like you don't see many slates where the top projected wide receiver is projected for 11.2 PPR fantasy points. That is insanely low. And that's where we're at on this slate. Let's see, is it any better here? No, it's even worse. 11 for Jayden Reed at RotoGrinders. We'll start with the Packers side. And the Packers are a little bit tough because we have a lot of games where like one of the starters has missed time. So I brought up just the past 5 games where all of their receivers have been like fully healthy for the entire game. And I'll pull that up in 1 second. Let's just take a look at the ownership. I guess we'll do one at a time. So Jayden Reed projected for 30% ownership in the flex. At captain, Jayden Reed projected for 6% ownership. It's tough because he was like early in the year, he showed so much promise. He showed so much splash play potential, and it's kind of just gone away. He hasn't done anything in recent weeks. I think 6%, I probably come in over 6% at captain for Jayden Reed. I think he's a pretty good bet there. Just hope that he does come back to showing some of those big plays. But they've been very intentional about spreading the ball around. Like if you read some of the recent quotes, it has been, let me see if I can find one real quick. Actually, a lot of positive stuff recently on Christian Watson, some really positive coach speak there. But a lot of what Matt LaFleur has said all year, and he said it in the offseason. He was like, I think he said, like, I throw up when I hear the term wide receiver 1. Like he hates the idea of having a star receiver. He wants it to be a rotation there. He's had a lot of positive things to say about all of his wide receivers in recent weeks. I'm trying to find one of the recent quotes on, wanting it to be like making sure that they're spreading the ball around. And, different weeks bringing different guys in. I'm not finding it right now, but that's been kind of the refrain since the offseason, that they don't really believe in focusing on one receiver. It is very much a like, we want to spread the ball around. We want everybody to be involved. So I think we can kind of continue to expect that from the Packers receiving core. My notes, or I guess I can read just the matchup stuff. Saints defense has allowed the 9th most schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to wide receivers over the past 5 weeks. So it's been a pretty strong matchup for receivers in recent weeks. But then again, the Packers just not throwing the ball all that much. Let's see if we can find it. Yeah, so these are the last 5 games. So week 7, 8, 9, 11, and 15. The last 5 games where all of the Packers receivers were healthy. And of course, Luke Musgrave not included here. But in those games, Jayden Reed, 21 targets in those 5 games. So only like just over 4 targets per game on 70.6% route participation. How many fantasy points is he averaging? 9.5 fantasy points per game in those games. That's kind of where he's projected at. Obviously, any one of these Packers receivers can spike with just like one big splash play, but you need that splash play. Like they're just not getting it done on volume. You need one of them to, make a 50-yard touchdown reception, something like that. So yeah, I think it's tough to get to like 36%. I think that's fine for Jayden Reed. I don't think he's my favorite of the group because he is the most expensive, and honestly, the role isn't really good enough to warrant being like more owned than Romeo, Doubs, Christian Watson, these others. So he's the most expensive. He's getting the most ownership. I'll probably be a little bit light in the flex, but I think maybe a little bit heavier than the 6% he's being projected for at captain, just in case he does have that splash play. And I kind of like all of the receivers as captain more so than in the flex of Reed, Watson, and Doubs. I think all of them make some sense in the captain spot at low ownership because they're all capable of having that splash play, or at least Reed and Watson are. Doubs, I don't know if he really shows splash plays so much, but he, if he has 6 receptions and a touchdown, he can get there. So I kind of like them better at captain in general. Probably be around maybe a little bit lighter than the field in the flex on all of them. I don't know. I think they're all pretty, except for I think Dobbs is actually 25%. That feels about right. I might come in there or above it. But yeah, I like them better generally at captain. So we've got Reed 30% ownership, Dobbs 25%, Watson 29% in the flex. At captain, we've got Watson getting 6.5%, Reed 6%, Dobbs 3.5%. So Dobbs actually kind of stands out there at 3.5%. Looks pretty good. But again, the usage. So getting back to, and we can look at the matchup stuff a little bit closer to see if we can break any ties here. But the usage over the past 5 weeks has been. So Reed, 9,000 as 21 targets, 70.6% route participation. Dobbs is 8,200, so a bit cheaper, 28 targets. So he's getting more targets over the past 5 weeks, 79.1% route participation for Dobbs. A lot of glowing coach speak there. And then Watson has also had, in recent weeks in particular, really strong coach speak. 25 targets over the past 5 games. 5 targets per game for Christian Watson is better than it is for Romeo Doubs, I'd say, because Christian Watson much more capable of big splash plays. And again, the coach speak has been pretty positive in recent weeks for Christian Watson. I mean, I can just read the very latest quotes in the Coach Speak Index Discord. Christian Watson, this is from offensive coordinator Adam Stenovich, says Christian Watson has been awesome. His explosive plays have really propelled this offense. Explosive plays lead to points. Once you get those plays, everyone gets fed. It scares the defenses too. Christian's vertical stretch is one of their big concerns, which opens up the underneath stuff for everyone else. You probably need it in the first half. I mean, not necessarily. Who knows how the game, we all think we know how the game's going to go. It might not go how we're expecting. But, probably hoping for a first half splash play for Christian Watson if he's going to pay off. But yeah, I think Watson, a pretty intriguing play. Ultimately, though, just look at this. It's flat, and it's not like Browns flat where they're all getting 10 targets per game. It's like they're all getting 4 to 5 targets per game, or under 6 targets per game. It's kind of gross. You're kind of hoping for a splash play for any of them. One of them probably gets there. It's kind of unpredictable who it's going to be. Let's take a brief look at the wide receiver cornerbacks matchup tool. Looks like Watson has the best coverage grade, so there's another point in favor of Watson. So I think Watson might be my favorite of the group. It's kind of up in the air between Watson and Doubs already. He's the one with clearly the best grade and the best expected fantasy points per route run. Tougher matchups for Jayden Reed, Tucker Kraft, and Romeo Doubs in terms of the schemes the Saints defense runs and how they do against those schemes. So it looks like it's a great matchup for Christian Watson, or at least an above average matchup for Christian Watson, and a little bit tougher for the others. So I think if I had to rank them, it would be Watson 1, Doubs 2, Reed 3. I think all of them look a little bit better in the captain spot than they do at flex. And then we have Dontavian Wicks, kind of the only other receiver I think worth mentioning here. Over those 5 games where everybody's healthy, 14 targets actually. So, fewer than the others, but still getting nearly 3 targets per game on 35.9% route participation. I kind of treat him differently than the others because he's more of a dart throw, just not really out on the field as much, like clearly just the wide receiver 4 at this point. 12% ownership at 4,000. I think he's a fine dart throw. And maybe he gets more work if there is a blowout. Maybe they do bring in the backups. But I think they just probably be running it at that point. I think Wicks is fine. I'm not super enthusiastic about that ownership level though. I just realized I'm still showing running backs here on the sidebar. And then we have to worry about the Saints side. And Wheels Up says he thinks that the Saints can he bet the 14.5 point spread. They might be able to. Wouldn't be, these are NFL players. Even if they are mostly NFL backups at this point, they are NFL players. Maybe they are able to keep up with the Packers to some extent. Um, on the Saints side, as far as receivers go, let me refresh this because it'll be interesting to see how different places are projecting them now. Because, like I said, even the beat reporters don't know how to project these receivers. So we've got Kevin Austin, the top projected, and that is the one that the beat reporter um, apparently thinks is the number one there. He is 3,200. Still doesn't even project that well, point per dollar. In recent weeks, let's take a look. So I just pulled up the last 2 weeks for the Saints because those are the weeks where we have not had Taysom Hill available. It has been Kevin Austin, actually 8 targets in that span. So he has been tied for second most on the team already over the past 2 weeks, and he's 57.1% route participation. So yeah, I think he's a pretty good bet to be like the next man up to see more routes, maybe a few more targets here, because he was already the top of the wide receivers outside of MVS. Yeah, I think at 3,200. Well, let's see what the ownership is on Kevin Austin now. So we're up to, I mean, it's only going to be 13.5%. Like that's a smash play. Let me see if other places agree on that. I'm not sure if maybe that is, Jake, you absolutely should be forcing 50% Kevin Austin captain for the brand as a UFL fan. You're forced to. All right, let me see. Wait. Let me just check another place. Curious if the ownership is similar because this is one that's going to be hard to project. Okay, other places have him like 20% ownership, which I think is more reasonable. But I think he's a fine play at 20% ownership. Again, somebody needs to catch the ball. He's only 3,200. I think that Kevin Austin, pretty strong play. There's no guarantee that he's the next man up for the Saints is the tough part of it. But yeah, I think at 3,200, if he's not going to be chalky, I think he is a fairly strong bet. I will probably have 20 to 25% Kevin Austin. But I do think it is worth mixing and matching all of these Saints. And again, I'll bring back up. So this is just the past 2 weeks where they've been mostly this group, although this is with MVS in. It was Kevin Austin was running the most routes, saw the most targets. Dante Pettis, who's just 1,000, I believe, had 6 targets on 41.4% route participation. Cedric Wilson, 2 targets on 38.6% route participation. So I would think you want to boost all of them. Like Kevin Austin gets a little bit of a boost in projection. Dante Pettis, not far behind, and then Cedric Wilson also playable at this point with no MVS. I think all are pretty strong bets. Let's see. Yeah, MVS mostly running out wide, so it would be Kevin Austin. It would make sense for Kevin Austin to be gaining from MVS being out, maybe seeing, just taking on more of those routes. Cedric Wilson also 55% out wide. Dante Pettis running more from the slot, so maybe he doesn't benefit quite as much. But I think they all probably benefit. None of them are like dedicated 100% slot receivers. But yeah, I think Kevin Austin being the biggest beneficiary feels like a pretty good bet to me. So I will be, 20-25% Kevin Austin. But I'm going to be mixing in all of these Saints receivers because I don't think anybody really knows. Pettis is just 1,000, getting 11% ownership. That seems like a pretty strong bet to me too. At just 1,000, Cedric Wilson 1,200, 7% ownership. I think just being mixing and matching them, and I'm not going to be playing. It'll be mostly like I'm probably going to be doing what the field does in a large sense, which is having mostly Packers onslaughts, where it's like 4-2 Packers Saints. And I know Cody Main tweeted this out earlier, the expectations for this game, and it's like nobody is playing 5-1 Saints onslaughts, and I don't think that I'm going to be playing 5-1 Saints onslaughts either. I want to see what they had. I'm going to pull up Cody's stuff. Because it's like I don't want to fall into doing exactly what the field is doing. Okay, yeah. So it's they at ATR, and this is on Cody's Twitter. 42% of the field playing for Green Bay, 2 Saints. 21% 5 Green Bay, 1 Saints player. 27% 3 and 3. So it's like 10% of the field is playing 4 to 5 Saints players. I hate to do it, but I think I'm probably with the field there. But I will have some. So I guess what I'm getting at is I like all of these cheap Saints receivers. I'll be mixing and matching them into a lot of lineups. I think I'll be over the field on all of them. I don't think I'm going to have that many lineups that have like even 2 of them. Probably, maybe I'll have a couple. I'll probably have some exposure to lineups that have multiple Saints receivers, but I think for the most part, it's going to be one Saints receiver with Kendre Miller or with Spencer Rattler, rather than having multiple of these. I'll probably have some. I'll probably have some where I have 2. I don't think I would play 3 of the Saints receivers because I just don't think that they're going to be able to put up that many fantasy points. Maybe I'll do, the odd here or there, like 4-2 Saints. There's some possibility. I don't know. I don't see a way for the Packers to not get there to that extent. I was thinking like, well, the Packers could sit their starters in the second half theoretically, but if they do that, it's because they've already scored a lot. So, I think they probably do. Probably just loading up on Packers, having a lot of 4-2 stacks makes a lot of sense. Matt says in the games Rattler started and finished, Cedric Wilson had a combined 10 targets, 8 receptions, 86 yards, and a touchdown. That's kind of interesting. Maybe has some of that second team chemistry. Yeah, that's a good call out. So maybe Cedric Wilson, a bit of a sneaky play tonight. I like that from Matt. But ultimately, I'm going to be playing over the field, I think, on all 3 of them. But Cedric Wilson, 7% ownership. That's a pretty damn good bet. I like that. Appreciate that shout out from Matt there, because I think that makes sense if you want to go there. But I think still, Pettis 11%. I'm going to be over that. Austin 13.5%. Definitely going to be over that also. I don't know if there are any other receivers on the Saints. Tipton, I guess, not getting any ownership. 1,800. Probably 4th in line for me. Has he even been running routes? Let's see. And obviously this is with MVS, so a player who has not been running routes does not mean they won't be running routes with MVS out. He hasn't run a route since week 10. I don't know if he's been inactive during the time. Maybe he's now active. I don't know what his deal is. He doesn't project that well, though. He's probably 4th in line for me. So I think it's probably Kevin Austin. Cedric Wilson is pretty intriguing just from he's getting the lowest ownership, and who knows, like maybe he just takes on more of that role. Pettis at 1,000 seems pretty good. I think betting on some Saints receivers, mixing and matching here and there makes sense. Okay. Oh, Tipton's been a healthy scratch. He's only active because MVS can't go. Yeah. Yes, Josh, MVS is out. Okay. I think that's it for receivers. We did the Packers, we did the Saints. I think we can move on. I guess you could make a case for, again, though, like I keep on going back to like if the game is a major blowout, maybe we do see a little bit more of like Bo Melton or Malik Heath. Like sometimes you see receivers come in blowouts, like they take out the starters. But I think in that case they'd just be running the ball anyway. So I still don't think I have a ton of enthusiasm for either Bo Melton or Malik Heath. All right, let's move on to tight ends. And tight ends also pretty intriguing on this slate. Or actually, I don't know. I'm not that super intrigued about the Packers tight ends. Who actually projects the best? It has to be Juwan Johnson. Yeah, Juwan Johnson projects the best. I guess we can do the Saints tight ends first. Juwan Johnson, Foster Moreau, both project really well. Both have had pretty strong roles. And again, we can take a look at. Actually, I didn't do this for the Saints. Juwan Johnson, the only one who qualifies in terms of like there's a threshold for like routes run to qualify for this filter, and none of the Saints receivers fit this filter. It is a nice matchup for Juwan Johnson though in terms of the coverage grade. Juwan Johnson. So over the past 2 weeks with no Taysom Hill, Juwan Johnson is second on the team, tied for second with 8 targets, 75.7% participation. So actually leading all active Saints. He was only behind MVS, who is out. Juwan Johnson seems like a pretty good bet here to take on additional usage with with MVS out. I think he could benefit there. He was already like pretty strong usage, 76%, 8 targets. He's only 4,400. I think Juwan Johnson makes a ton of sense. And then Foster Moreau, 41.4% route participation. We could see them do more two tight end sets here. He already has 6 targets over the past 2 games too. So I think both of the Saints tight ends are pretty good plays in a vacuum. Johnson projected for 24% ownership in the flex. I like that. I think playing Johnson makes a lot of sense there. Foster Moreau, 17% at 3,000. I don't know that I'm going like above the field there, but I think I probably with the field at 17% on Moreau. I might be above the field on Juwan Johnson. He's the only starter that they have left of the pass. I mean, love anybody, I guess. The running backs, the pass catchers, he's the only starter remaining. He's only 4,400, 24% ownership. I think that makes sense on Juwan Johnson. 4% projected ownership of captain. It's kind of meh. Foster Moreau, 1%. I don't know. Okay. But yeah, I think the New Orleans Saints are pretty good bets. Tougher for me is the Packers tight ends. Tucker Kraft, he had that little stretch earlier in the year where he was looking like a potential star. Not so recently. Over the past 5 games with all receivers healthy, and this is not including Luke Musgrave. Luke Musgrave is out, all receivers in, just 14 targets, so under 3 targets per game in those 5 games, 78.4% route participation. So he's running the routes. He's just not been targeted in those games. And he's 5,800, so he's more expensive than Juwan Johnson. Doesn't really have a great role. 24% ownership. So I guess I prefer Johnson if I'm playing one of them. Now, Kraft does have Jordan Love throwing in the ball, so that is a pretty big upgrade over Spencer Rattler as far as who's throwing in the ball, but he's more expensive, targeted less. The projection only a half a point different for $1,400. I think he's a fine play. I think he's as likely as any receiver probably to score a touchdown, I guess. Brandon says 4 catches, 50 yards, 2 touchdowns. I'm sure it's possible for Tucker Kraft. That is possible. Like, he wouldn't be that shocking. I think he's like I said, like about as likely as any Packers pass catcher to score a touchdown here. Oh, good call out from Trevor. Malik Heath is inactive, so definitely don't play Malik Heath anyway. But yeah, I don't know. I think I'm probably going to be light on 24% at 5,800 for Tucker Kraft and just bet against the touchdown. Especially with Luke Musgrave back. Who knows how much Luke Musgrave is going to eat into it. There was a quote, and I don't know if any of you were watching the game, but I think it was Chris Collinsworth was saying like, oh, we were talking to oh god, why do I want to call him McVay? It's not McVay. We were talking to Matt LaFleur, and he was saying like, oh no, what am I going to do when Luke Musgrave comes back? We're going to have 2 great tight ends. Like, I'm not going to know what to do. And they were kind of making fun of him for an embarrassment of riches. But I thought it was interesting that like he talks about it like he does think that Luke Musgrave is somebody that he needs to give some playing time to. But the most recent, there was nothing on that in the Coach Week Index Discord. It wasn't said in press conference or something, but I thought that was interesting the way he was talking about it. Like, oh no, we're going to have to get Luke Musgrave involved, and how are we going to do it? But the Coach Week has been kind of like they're going to ease him in. Let's see. So on the 20th, Matt LaFleur said Luke Musgrave has looked good the last couple of days. We'll see if he's ready to play. Yes, he can be a significant contributor this season. He has something that you can't really coach in terms of the speed he brings to the field. It's not like we would go out there and play him 70 snaps, but if we could ease him back in, I think that would be really good for him and us. On the same day, offense coordinator Adam Stenovich said Luke Musgrave looked good. He was running around. The big thing is to see how he can do blocking and change of direction and things like that. His linear speed looked good. He made some plays down the field running. It's just a day-to-day thing, and we'll see if we can get him out there on Monday. He's a vertical threat that can really stretch the field. He does a good job blocking at the point of attack. So just another weapon you can use in the run game too. My takeaway is we're probably not going to see 50% plus route participation for Luke Musgrave. We're probably looking at like 25%, 30% route participation. So he's basically just the classic backup tight end where we need a touchdown for him to pay it off. But he's not getting, last I looked, a ton of ownership. Okay, this is not showing ownership. Let me refresh real quick, see if that changes. and reset the projections. 3% ownership, I think, is a pretty good bet. Like, I think he's more talented than most backup tight ends. I don't know if I buy the 3% ownership, but he's 1,600. Even if he does get 25% route participation, seems as likely as anybody to score a touchdown. Maybe they want to get him a touchdown in his first game back. I don't know. Three. If he comes in 3%, I'll be above that number. I'm not sure if we can count on 3% ownership. But yeah, I think looks like a strong play if he does come in. Devin says, I'm guessing sub 5%. All right. I mean, if he's going to be sub 5%, I don't hate that. To any other way. All right. On the wide receiver coverage tool, change the position filter to any and other. Okay, let me see. All right. That's interesting. Okay. Anybody else qualify here? Very strong coverage grade for Foster Moreau. Dante Pettis, pretty strong coverage grade. Juwan Johnson. Huh. That is good to know. Very, very bad coverage matchup for Kevin Austin. That's interesting. Like, that's a really, really bad number. I'm still playing him. That's not going to scare me off him, but it's interesting. Neutral for Cedric Wilson. Good matchup for Dante Pettis. Great matchup for Foster Moreau. That's interesting. What about the Packers? I think there was nobody else we really need to. Bo Melton, I guess he's active. Great coverage grade. Probably not going to play much. Chris Brooks, nice coverage grade. Interesting. Okay. Anyway, back to tight ends. So yeah, I think Luke Musgrave just as a tournament dart throw, I'd rather have. I'm going to have more than 3% in large field tournaments. Tucker Kraft, I probably end up a little bit light there, just because we've got Musgrave back. He hasn't really been involved anyway, but again, he's just as likely, I think, as anybody to score a touchdown. And if he scores a touchdown, you'll probably want him. That's it as far as the tight ends go. Defenses kickers are fairly important on this slate, I would say. Starting with the defenses, Packers defense is 6,200. I think it's entirely warranted. I think I'm going to have a good amount of the Packers defense. Playing against Spencer Rattler, like, I think they're one of the highest floors on the slate. And I think certainly if the Saints do like get forced to throw at some point, they're a pretty good bet to, make an interception, maybe get a turnover here. So I like the Packers defense quite a bit. So does the field. 23.5% projected ownership in the flex at captain, 2.5% projected ownership. I still think I probably come in slightly higher than those numbers, but not much. I think I'm probably going to be pretty close to the field there because they are very, very expensive. And again, getting 26%-ish total ownership, I think it's warranted. McManus is projected for 21% ownership. I think that he's a pretty good bet also. I think I'm going to be above the field there on Brandon McManus for sure. I think the Packers going to be able to move the ball pretty easily. They should be able to score touchdowns, but it's also like pretty likely that they're going to have to settle for some field goals here. So that's going to be one of the players that I have over the field rather than making bets on all of the random wide receivers. I think just like betting on they get stopped in field goal range makes a lot of sense too. So I going to have a lot of both the Packers defense and Brandon McManus. I'm not as enthusiastic about Blake Groupie at 16% ownership just because I think they'll abandon kicking field goals in the second half. Maybe they won't. Maybe they're just like, we're going to lose this game. Let's score any points we can. I think he's fine at 4,800, 16% ownership. That feels about right. And then the Saints defense projected for just 11% ownership at 3,400. I think that's pretty good. I think that's a number that I'll probably be slightly on top of also, just because they are pretty contrarian. They still have upside. I don't love it that I think the Packers are going to be running it just over and over, and that really takes away some of that upside, or at least the likelihood of hitting the upside for the defense if they are primarily running the ball. So I don't really think it's a number that I want to get much on top of, but I think 11% is light enough that I'll probably be slightly over there. Okay. Um, excuse me. All right. Um, let's take a brief look at FanDuel. Then I'll play around with some lineups. All right. So on FanDuel at MVP, damn, Josh Jacobs, 55% ownership on FanDuel. So I'm eating that on DraftKings. I think 55%, a little bit much for me. I think I'd rather stay away from that number on FanDuel. I'd probably rather go to one of the receivers. Um, Man, that's insane. I mean, Jordan Love, 36.5%. So those two are eating up 90% of the ownership at MVP. You can just play anybody else to get different. I think that makes sense. Go to Spencer Rattler, Kendre Miller. What if he is Alvin Kamara? Has that same workload that Alvin Kamara had, and he's only 11,000. So I think he's a pretty good bet at 2.5% cap and ownership. Christian Watson, 1%, nice matchup, capable of splash plays. 9,500. I like him as an MVP. Jayden Reed, 1%, looks good. Packers defense at 0.25% ownership on FanDuel at MVP. Yeah, I think I'd on FanDuel I'd rather go to anybody other than Josh Jacobs and Jordan Love. I think just like spread out my ownership to these others. Of course, they are clearly the two that are most likely to be the optimal MVP. Josh Jacobs in particular, probably going to be the optimal MVP. Like if you're playing in a cash game, he would be like the obvious MVP. But I think in large field tournaments, I would rather take shots on other players, outscoring them. Um, in the flex, again, those two getting the most ownership as they probably should. Kendre Miller, 38% seems pretty good. Jayden Reed, just 20% flex ownership. I don't hate that. Romeo Doubs, 19% looks pretty good. Only 5% going to Dante Pettis at 6,000. I like that number. 7% going to Foster Moreau. 2% going to Emmanuel Wilson. I think that's kind of an interesting play. Cedric Wilson getting just 1% ownership on FanDuel. I mean, that's pretty intriguing. At 6,500, Cedric Wilson 1% owned as a probably starting receiver for the Saints today. Kevin Austin 11.5% looks pretty good. So yeah, we've got some nice options on FanDuel to get away from ownership. I don't know that I have necessarily a favorite there. I think it might be Cedric Wilson at 1% on FanDuel. I think that might be my favorite of the low owned options. But I also I think Kevin Austin looks good. Both the Green Bay running backs, Chris Brooks and Emmanuel Wilson, both look like pretty strong bets on FanDuel. Pettis at 5% looks good. A lot of strong options. Saints defense, 2% ownership going to Saints defense on FanDuel. That's way too low. So yeah, a lot of strong plays on FanDuel. I'm going to move this back to DraftKings. I'm going to check in on any questions, and I'll play around with some lineups here. All right. Thank you guys for reminding people. Yeah, please do like the video. Helps out with the algorithm. Helps me with growing the channel. If you would hit the like button, I would appreciate it. And if you're not already subscribed, again, you need to be subscribed. If you have any questions or anything, you need to be subscribed for at least 5 minutes. Good way to get rid of some bots here. So subscribe, please, if you have not done so. I'm trying to get to 5,000 by the end of the NFL season. Yeah, Williams, I think he's a fine bet on FanDuel again. Like they also could just bring him in at the goal line. I think he's a fine play there. What's up, Kieran? Good to see you. What time is it there in Australia? Sean says he's got 21 lines and they're all over the place. I think, yeah, it's tough, man. It is. This is not an easy slate to pin down. I think. All right, I'm going to start building a lineup. I'm going to start building a lineup here. Let's just start with Josh Jacobs in the captain spot. Uses up a lot of salary. I think he looks really good. Again, I think this is one where I'm just going to go like, let's do a gross This is I'm going to start with kind of a chalky thing, which I think going Jacobs, Packers defense, McManus might be sort of chalky on this slate. But there are plenty of ways to then get different. I think we could go then if we go Spencer Rattler, and then rather going to a Green Bay receiver, we go to Juwan Johnson. And see, now you can fit Romeo Doubs, but it wouldn't be that shocking to see one of these cheap receivers for the Saints outscore the Packers receivers, because the Packers are just running all game. So then the Saints receivers, like, we want to throw Kevin Austin there. So now what upgrades could we make that we're confident would be good upgrades? So we could upgrade Packers defense to anybody out here. But do we want to throw Jordan Love in there? We're not confident he's going to be throwing much. Are we sure that Kendre Miller is going to outscore the Packers defense? I'm not that sure of that. So I think this is a slate where you can leave significant salary on the table, because all of the Saints starting receivers are mega inexpensive here. Of course, I do have Spencer Rattler here instead of Jordan Love. Again, we're making the bet in this lineup that it's going to be the Packers just run the ball the entire game. The Saints are throwing to keep up with the Packers, which I think is certainly within the range of outcomes. It might make sense to just flip it a little bit, make tweaks here. But I honestly, I don't hate this lineup for a large field GPP. I think it could just be like Spencer Rattler is throwing it a ton, and his main targets are Juwan Johnson and Kevin Austin, and one of them scores a touchdown, and then Spencer Rattler runs one in, and they outscore Jordan Love just because Jordan Love's volume is so low. I think that is plausible, a plausible way for this to play out. It's not the likeliest outcome, so this is certainly not like a cashy lineup. But yeah, if you wanted to go cashier, then it would be, a higher projected lineup. It would be like Jordan Love. You're from upgrading from Spencer Rattler to Jordan Love. I think that's like a 7-point difference in projection there. But then you would want to have, all right, so then Jordan Love in there. Who do I want to pair with Jordan Love? Now I can't include any of the, can't replace either of the Saints receivers with one of the Packers receivers. I guess I could do, then you could do something like this where you go Christian Watson and then go down to Cedric Wilson. I think that looks like a pretty strong lineup. This one probably higher EV than the last one, just because it projects significantly better. Cedric Wilson projected for really low ownership, which kind of offsets everybody else getting a fair amount of ownership in this lineup and leaves 14 under the table. So I think this one, makes some sense here. All right, I'm going to check in on chat, see if you have questions or anything. All right. Which Packers receiver do I go with in fantasy? If you're forced to play one Packers receiver in fantasy, I would just go with Jayden Reed because he's the top projected. Like if you have them all on your bench, Jayden Reed is, I think, pretty clearly the top projected. Actually, yeah, he's the top projected by more than a full fantasy point. So for me, for season long, I'm kind of somebody who takes on a lot of risk generally in my season long. I usually just play the top projected plays in my lineup most of the time. Yeah, you can certainly play both defenses. Johnson to Reed. Oh, Juwan Johnson, I could have flipped. Yeah, before I did anything, we flipped him up to Jayden Reed or something. All right, we ready to go? You guys making some lineups? If you win tonight, make sure you let me know. Particularly if you think that the show helped you win, I would appreciate if you let me know. I always love to hear it. Jesse wants to know, why is Dante Pettis the nuts? He looked good in the wide receiver coverage matchup tool, right? Yeah, he had a great coverage grade there. He's only 1,000, so he might be the nuts. Yeah, let's win some money tonight. Let me know if you do win some money. I am hopeful that Josh Jacobs does not go off in the way I'm expecting him to, because I'm really trying to get some best ball teams through that need him to not put up 23 plus FanDuel points. But I think he's just going to go off tonight. What would be an off the wall FanDuel type lineup? Anything other than Jordan Love or Josh Jacobs at MVP is already like you're getting rid of a ton of ownership just by going to somebody different. So just start with Christian Watson at MVP, or Packers defense, or Brandon McManus at MVP. Like he could just be the highest scoring player on the slate. you're immediately kind of off the wall. 2 Green Bay backs, I like that too. I'm going to play a lot of lineups that have multiple Green Bay backs in them. It's a way that we could get a little bit different. Um, all right, all right, we're gonna get going. Love to hear that, Sean. That you're losing less. One of these days, you're gonna have that big win, and you're gonna be a big winner. All right, any thoughts on Love coming out early and the backup quarterback putting up some points? I mean, they're still fighting for playoff positioning, so I don't think that it would be until like the fourth quarter, most likely. It certainly could happen in the fourth quarter. That is well within the range of outcomes. I don't think that I would like. I don't think it's likely enough that I want to play the backup quarterback here, because it would probably just be like a quarter of the backup quarterback, and it would probably be they're not throwing it a ton at that point anyway. So it's not enough that I want to play the backup quarterback. All right, I got to get going. Got to start making my lineups. Let's win some money tonight. Me and you. Let's all win some money tonight, and let's all celebrate together after the game. Thanks, guys. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't liked the video, etc., etc. Thanks. Good luck tonight, and I'll see you tomorrow. Check out the Fantasy Points channel. I might do another show on this show as well for the Christmas slate. That would be tomorrow. Not doing one on Christmas. So look out for that as well. All right. Thanks, guys. I will catch you later.